speakers and panelists are assembling. If anybody has any questions, certainly raise your hand, and I'm sure someone from the ARC team will find you and let you ask your question. In the meantime, we certainly will let me introduce some of the panelists, and once everybody gets seated. If the stage starts sagging, just please let us know. We're probably have exceeded the person limit, so don't let anybody in the officials in Orlando know for fire laws or what have you. I'm going to start off with introduce Donato Gerardo Pascal. He's a water segment manager with Schneider Electric. So I'd like you to introduce yourself, and I'm going to start off with the first question for you, which is what kind of software did Padina Acque use, and what were they trying to accomplish?
Thank you. Is work? Yes. We started to work with in water since a long time ago, and so in Schneider we have this platform called EcoStruxure that dedicated to water that can allow it to bring data from the field and store and manage it until the level of analytics. So we use it in Padania Acque, starting from the field. We like to underline it because Jan before talked about the importance of the data. So for us, the data is important and are important because remote operation is critical. And so we started to use SCADApack as a collector and using the MP3, which is allowed to have timestamping until the GeoSCADA, which is the software that we use it to collect and to manage the application. And then we have a connection in analytics with water loss, EcoStruxure water loss, that allow it to manage all the water losses in the water network, and water simulation that can allow it to simulate some condition, so the people can know when they close some valve or there is some issue with the pumps, what is the result of this kind of fail, or they can manage before, and then they can manage before knowing which is the user that is impacted to this fail.
Okay, great, thank you. Next, I want to introduce Derek Chambers, who's a senior systems engineer at Flexware. And your first question is, what are some of the things that your team has implemented to keep your clients' ignition apps safe and secure?
Yeah, yep, I'm a senior systems engineer at Flexware. Flexware is a shop floor to top floor integrator. We do all kinds of different verticals, including water, wastewater, of course. So Rob Raffaelli spoke here last year at this event, and it's more his lane to define a cybersecurity strategy. And I think the question as an integrator and using products like Ignition is, how does Ignition fit inside of that cybersecurity strategy? I think the flexibility and the built-in features of Ignition definitely fall in line with their strategy. We're doing things like network segmentation at the edge, we're configuring outgoing connections, using secure data transport like MQTT, and then at the top, we're leveraging American Water's AD with localized roles. So that's just some of the stuff we're doing. Ignition also has great documentation. They have an Ignition hardening guide that you can follow. And I think all of that falls in line with helping the integrator help American Water. So. Thank you.
Next is going to be Joseph DeLivo, who's a CTO of Foyer Solutions. And your first question is my facility has a hodgepodge of legacy hardware and software, but I've never heard that question before. What are some of the steps that I can take to achieve operational resiliency that don't involve ripping and replacing, which is both expensive and time-consuming?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I mean, we're coming into these, heterogeneous environments that have a bunch of hodgepodge, if you will, hardware and software products, and so the ideal of starting from a greenfield is not very common, not typical, and so usually you've got this sort of legacy hardware software that you're kind of looking to modernize, and you can't do it all at once. So One of the techniques that we look at is trying to consolidate where you can and use that as a foundation for your evolution in your strategy. So an example is using like leased hardware or using consolidated hardware that runs virtualization, that runs containers. You can take some of these legacy applications that might be running on standalone servers. It could be running on industrial PCs that aren't necessarily being monitored and managed. You can take all those and consolidate those onto a single managed hardware platform and take advantage of scalability, virtualization, containerization, all those great things. But there's really, in some cases, no additional cost to doing that. Migrate everything to one place, and then you can kind of piecemeal do your modernization upgrade starting from there. So.
Okay, great. And next is James Hind, who's the CEO of Energy Drive Systems. And your first question is, what do you see as the most significant challenges facing operational leaders in the markets that you're focused on?
Yeah, I think your slide was quite pertinent earlier that, sustainability is good business, but there's still significant challenges in primary industry. They're very distressed often, brownfields. We don't all have the luxury of greenfield investments. And what we've seen is significant stresses around just operational, sustaining operations in terms of a certain KPI standard or whatever. And then overlaying that, the additional pressures that we're seeing now, such as sustainability, ESG. Investors have driven boards to make commitments, significant commitments for 2030, 2050. And that's really where we saw a niche in terms of our business offering, is around being an additional resource or capacity to these operations and these industries to actualize certain targets that they've been given, but frankly just don't have the resource availability. Skills, I said it in an earlier session, our business was developed around challenges in South Africa, which is really often CapEx restrictions, skills limitations with mass immigration over time, and the likes. And actually we see it as a common challenge both in our UK, EU market, and we're seeing it in North America. And thus the same opportunity to provide a service model to enhance capacity to get stuff done effectively.
Okay, great, thanks. If we have any questions in the audience, just let us know. Otherwise, we have plenty of questions to keep us going. First question for the speaker is Stefano. It's what are some of the reasons that led you to kind of implement this advanced water management system, and what impact did the decision have on your company?
Yes, there was many reasons why we took this decision, but three are basically the most important. The first one was the need of a telemetry system, new with advanced features, working in addition of the pre-existing remote control system. The second was the need of a unique, a sole control room connecting all network and plants. And the third was the need of a standardized system that allows the real data, demand-driven modulation of pressures and flows. And this in order to save power and also to preserve pipes, because now we can model the pressure on the basis of the real data, of the real demand based on real data. And so we don't maintain the pressure higher when it is not necessary. But we also need to introduce any changes, both at organizational level and in the corporate culture. We created two new operational units, one dedicated to telemetry and the other one dedicated to the operations center. We replace some people after a technical reskilling. And on the side of soft skill, we try to change the old reactive approach with a new proactive and predictive approach.
Okay, great. I got one for you, Pat. Where do the support partners fit into the digital transformation and operational resilience strategy and implementation?
Yeah, great question. Yeah, I think we lean on our partners strategically for their experience and exposure to the market, right? We have to realize we don't have all the answers. We don't know the best technologies and implementations that are going on out there. And when you deal with partners, you know, in your group that have that exposure to multiple industries as well as your own, you know, you can bridge that gap. I have a background from SI. I have a true appreciation for how that exposure to multi-industries and multi-platforms really allows you to bring the best ideas to bear. So we count on them strategically.
Okay, great. And Jan, why is scalability of analytics so important?
Yeah, so scalability, in our opinion, because we're getting on the same line here within the corporation. Scalability is important because our ultimate customers are asking for it. We need to have complete views of operating centers, but not only that, we need complete views of how operations are doing across the corporation to move flexibly, move work around. You know, use your whole asset park much better than what you used to do, return on assets. So you want to optimize your asset return across the corporation. But then also it scales further than that. Utilities are very interested. The plant like Fort Worth, it's over 200 acres. We have 18,000 employees. It uses a lot of resources. And so our utilities vendors are very interested in what's happening with us, how are we predicting our future. So the analytics we're doing on our energy consumption is very of much interest to our utility suppliers. You know, how much water are we going to use? And then they actually feed it back into analytic solutions, digital twins if you want, but I prefer to call them analytic solutions that the county wants to run, the town wants to run, the county wants to run, which in the end probably could feed up all the way into how we run our country. But so the scaling, the analytics solution scales from nuts and bolts on the floor all the way how the country is run. So for that reason, scalability is vitally important, because if everybody sits on an island and nobody can actually talk, that is a real problem. So analytic solutions have to support all the way up to the highest level of abstraction, so that people can take real decisions on them. You know, they don't get sent off into a direction that just doesn't really matter. So that's the importance of scalability. It goes all the way up.
Okay, great. Jean-Paul, you know, when you were going through the evaluation process for various suppliers, I know certainly you settled on Ignition, but was operational resilience, you know, at that time one of the selection criterias?
It's hard to say. That was well over, I think, 13 years ago.
Yeah, exactly.
But I think just fundamentally inherent in the selection, it was just sort of baked in the cake, if you want to call it that, right? Like at the time when we were sitting there looking at that platform, we were evaluating other platforms and evaluating what we had currently to sit there and say if that would suffice, and the functionality that the platform, you know, marketed it and said it could do sort of dovetailed really nicely with all of the things that we sit there and look at relative to, you know, that larger topic of resilience. So,
okay, great. We have a question from the audience.
We have a couple of questions. My name is Michelle Boulders, and I am from Atorio. It's a cyber physical risk management platform. And this question is really for American Water and Pat, but I think it could go across the entire panel. I have about 25 years of experience working with physical vendors, so in the firewall, switching, routing market space. And what you're doing with Ignition is very intriguing to me. And with the data analytics, do you see the need for vendors like Atorio to be able to just simply sit on top of Ignition as an application, to be able to listen to all of the data, to be able to help you make threat risk analysis decisions? Or so the applications, I don't remember which one said it, but the applications will come and go based off of the flavor of the day and how the industry changes. So really, do we start to see unified data lakes, and then at that point, it's having a unified data layer, and then at that point, adding applications on top of it as different vendors come up with different ideas?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a great question. And cybersecurity, is such a broad topic. My experience more is, at a little bit lower level, but certainly with that understanding of, threat detection and monitoring for our systems. If you can sit at the same layer and provide analytics as to the throughput and the things going on, put it in the lake so that we can evaluate it and look at it as a group. I think that brings value to us, right? I think, understanding, like you said, that the apps are going to change. So it's not so much what you're talking to, but the fact that you're talking to something and the analytics around it would be beneficial.
Okay. Anybody else in the panel want to comment? None?
Yeah, that's exactly what you're referring to is exactly the way we view it. Our data goes into a data lake, and we want to build applications on top of it so that the applications don't own the data, if you will, or don't lock the data. So yes, we want applications to actually access our data lake, use the data, and give us the insights. And then the way we view it is may the best insight provider win. But you are all working from the same set of data, which I curate, which I add semantics to, because an uncurated and non-semantic data lake is just a data cesspool. We can't have that. So our data lake needs to be clean, curated, semantics properly semantically enhanced, if you will. They have to follow data dictionaries. So we are very particular in what we store in our data lake. But when it passes all our verification and validation, then it's actually put into that data lake so that it can be used later on for whatever tool can give us the most bang for the buck.
Okay. Anybody else want to comment? Or we'll go through with that.
I'll just call out the value of Sparkplug B as an example, using brokers, MQTT, to sort of decouple your data producers and your data subscribers, but also to build a common data model, like we were talking about, to kind of have that standard. And then you've got an interface between multiple different systems. And within that interface, whether that's deployed on-premise somewhere, whether that's deployed in the cloud, that's really where you can do your intrusion detection, your network traffic analysis. So I think there is a role. I think building it into an app, so to speak, like you said, apps kind of change, but building it into a data architecture, I think, is absolutely critical. And especially as more systems, which were maybe formerly, siloed, if you will, or supposedly disconnected from the internet, as those are getting connected more and more amongst themselves, the importance of doing that kind of security analysis is all the more important. So.
Anybody else? Or we'll go to the next question. Okay.
So I have a couple questions. So I'll switch to energy. So for Energy Drive, question for you around the resiliency piece. So we have a lot of customers focused on reducing energy costs, but we also hear about the supply chain resiliency. So whether that's the energy crisis in Europe, the rising costs, or looking to switch to renewables or things, do you factor with like digitization or any of your offerings as a service to go beyond reduction and also look at resiliency and helping with that with your customers?
Yeah, I think fundamentally in terms of our solution, at its core is delivering a sustainability result and energy reduction. But as I've said a number of times in forums today, or in the forum today, is that really with the complexities and the risks around supply chain risks and skills risks and resource availability risks holistically, really, and something I do love about this sort of forum is that really it requires collaboration. So we just see ourselves, as a few people have mentioned on the panel, is that we are just additional capacity to build resilience. So, it's a bit of a corny saying, together we can do more, but it's true. And it's finding the relevant competencies. So at the end of the day, our solution with our clients, the result is sustainable energy reduction, but it builds resilience in, because what we're also doing is we are taking often brownfield, aged technology motors, older motors, and effectively extending and reducing risk around failure on those systems as well, by converting it to a digital electronic control as opposed to mechanical. We always know that putting a good process control in place will always be softer and better and sustainable than a person. in terms of stability.
Anybody else? Yeah, go ahead.
Yes, for what you said, what you're asking, I think that the first important point is to measure exactly what you are consuming for energy. For our experience in water, we are looking to reduce energy, reducing the pressure in the pipes, and improving the operation in the plant into aeration of the plant, where the consumption is very high. So we have a specific analytics to do that. For what we apply in Padania Acque is water loss and water simulation, can distribute the right quantity of water at the right time in order to give the minimum pressure possible that avoid also the pipe leakage and the resilience of the pipes. And for the wastewater treatment plant, the water treatment plant is important to have the measure and to measure in the process, optimizing the process, and we have a specific tool to do that.
Okay. Anybody else follow up, or we go ahead?
Based on the whole conference, I'm starting to draw the conclusion from the perspective of as we build these data lakes, and I'll refer to them as multiple data lakes, but we could also see it being converged data lakes. The security industry really needs to catch up from the perspective of digital rights management to the data, because you're going to be sharing it between different identities, and you may want to revoke that data rights at any given point in time. And in this market today, I don't see very many security vendors that actually focus towards data protection and database protection today. So as you look at using these data models, what are you thinking about from the perspective of access control, role-based access control, data sovereignty, data rights management from the perspective of these data lakes that we're talking about?
Okay, anybody?
I can touch on that a little bit. So I do work with pharmaceutical customers who have a lot of the requirements that you're talking about with data sovereignty, data residency, data access. When you're producing SaaS applications, for example, you have to consider multi-tenancy. So how are you protecting data even amongst customers within the same system, right? So I think there are products in that space that try to make some of that possible, or maybe not easy, but possible, if you will. So when you're querying databases, for example, there's tools that allow you to provide like row-level security. So depending on sort of the persona that you're using to access that, I'm only going to be able to pull out certain data, right? I can link the authentication with a database to a centralized identity provider, for example, that makes me go through multi-factor authentication, or I have to use something like PIM, where I have to go through an escalation process to get access to things. So, and then of course audit logs that are generated anytime somebody tries to access a system. So there are tools. Edition, as an example, has great built-in auditing capabilities, great support for some of these cloud native or even on-prem database tools that provide some of these security features. But it's hard to say if there's sort of, I don't know that there's a one-stop shop to it, but there are best practices, I'd say, that have been established kind of in that space that enable some of what I think you're addressing, which is very valid and important, by the way.
Anybody else, or? Because if not, unfortunately we've run out of time. But if you do, please join me in thanking the speakers and the panelists for doing a great job.